The morning light, what little of it can find its way through the dense gray fog, paints the interior of the cabin in muted tones. The air is still, so heavy with the scent of damp earth and unwashed bodies that it feels thick enough to taste. From beneath a moth-eaten wool blanket, a hand emerges, thin as a bird's claw. It is the hand of a boy no older than 10, and it trembles with a feverish rhythm that has nothing to do with the cold. His small fingers, raw and chapped, curl inward as if trying to hold on to the memory of something solid. He doesn't open his eyes, not yet. He listens for a sound. Not the rustle of a new day, not the clatter of a pot on a fire, but the absence of it all. The silence where the pigs once squealed, the quiet where a woman's soft weeping once filled the air for her buried child. This is a silence that has a voice of its own, a hollow, aching hum that whispers of slow decay. And then a sound. The bell of the watchtower, a thick, rusted clang that once meant a new day had begun, now tolls with the slow, mournful sound of a coffin lid dropping. This was not the Eden they were promised. The men who sailed across the vast, indifferent ocean spoke of a world overflowing with bounty. They were gentlemen, not farmers, with hands soft from leisure and eyes fixed on the false gleam of gold in the riverbeds. They dreamed not of planting fields or building homes, but of finding a treasure that would set them free forever. They came with swords and silks, with polished boots and empty stomachs, their minds on riches, and their hearts unprepared for the unyielding reality of this new land. The Jamestown they built was a monument to their own hubris. They built a church before they built a storehouse and prayed for a salvation that never came. The earth, hard and cold, refused to be tamed by their soft hands. It gave up no root, no game, no sustenance. The corn, so bountiful in the stories of the native people, was a memory that taunted them like a mirage. The cold was a living thing, a predator that seeped into the very bones of the fort. It crawled beneath the doors and clung to the rough-hewn logs of the palisade. The Powhatan siege had turned the verdant land they once believed to be a paradise into a cage. To venture beyond the walls was to invite a quick, brutal end. Their precious English tools, the rusted nails, the adzes, and the axes, all lay abandoned. The true currency of this world was not coin or silver, but the brutal, simple weight of a single ear of maize. Every creak of a door, every shuffling footstep in the darkness was a question of who would be the next to fade into the hungry earth. The hope that once gleamed in their eyes had been replaced by a quiet, feral desperation that lived in the shadows of their faces. The memory of their homeland, of hearty stews and warm bread, was no longer a comfort, but a cruel, exquisite form of torture. And so, the unthinkable began to take root in the soil of their desperation. The whispers started in the deep, freezing nights, quiet words about the horses and the dogs that had already vanished, words spoken in the dark corners of the fort, where the human shape of a man seemed to shrink and become something else. The thin, sickly aroma that now hung in the air, a scent that had nothing to do with pine or river mud, was the real ghost of this place. It was the smell of a forgotten, primal hunger that had transcended the simple need for food and become a dark ritual. The ropes hanging from the gallows, once meant for petty thieves, now seemed to wait for a greater, more fundamental crime. They were not just starving for gold anymore. They were starving for a part of themselves they had already lost. The boy finally opens his eyes. The world is a blur of gray and brown, a landscape of decay and muted light. He pushes himself up, his bones feeling like old, brittle sticks. His gaze drifts toward the window, where the frost still glitters like a million tiny, cruel diamonds. He sees a black crow, a dark messenger, a light on the skeletal branches of a barren oak. It is a silhouette against the pale sky, a shape of an omen. It stares back at him with a cold, intelligent eye, a quiet witness to the fall of humanity. The boy knows, with the simple, devastating clarity of a child, that this is not the end of the hunger. This is only the beginning of what they will do to survive it. The true horror of this new world was not in the wilderness, but in the slow, agonizing discovery of the wilderness within themselves. The air is a heavy, smothering thing, thick with the perpetual scent of sickness, and the acrid tang of wood smoke from fires that offer more illusion than heat. It clings to the rough-hewn logs of the palisade, a fragrance of slow-burning despair that has replaced the sweet musk of the Virginia forest. a woman stands in this world of muted gray and brown, her face gaunt and drawn, the skin stretched taut over the sharp angles of her jaw. Her hands, delicate and once used to the fine stitch of a needle, now clutch a small wooden doll. Its carved features are smooth and unmarred, a perfect, unfeeling face that stands in stark, cruel contrast to her own wasted form. The doll is a relic of a life now lost, a testament to a daughter who died quietly in her sleep a fortnight ago. The woman's lips are cracked and dry, and she has not spoken a full sentence in days. Her eyes, wide and hollow, stare out at the river, a ribbon of cold gray beneath the oppressive sky. She has no tears left to cry. The grief is a stone that has settled in the hollow of her chest, too heavy to be moved. The winter's chill has seeped into the very bones of this settlement, a cold that no fire can truly conquer. The men who came here, with their soft hands and grand words, had believed themselves untouchable. They had come to conquer a new world, but the land had conquered them. The Powhatan siege has made the vast forest a cage, its trees and shadows now a constant, threatening wall. To venture beyond the gates is to invite a quick, brutal end. The furs they brought from England, the fine hunting knives at their waists, the pewter cups and silver coins, all are worthless now, empty symbols of a world that no longer exists. They traded the tools of survival for the tools of a feverish greed, and the land, in its quiet, savage patience, has revealed their folly. The memory of her husband's last words echoes in her mind, a raw, piercing sound. "A bit of bread," he had whispered, his hand reaching for hers, before the light in his eyes had faded, extinguished like a candle in a gale. It is an echo that serves as a constant, subtle form of torture, a reminder of the futile, agonizing finality of their hunger. The men around her, once proud adventurers, are now hollow shells, their bodies gaunt, their eyes filled with a quiet, feral desperation. They move like ghosts through the muddy lanes, their footsteps silent, their lives a slow, inexorable descent into the earth. The true currency of this new world is not coin or silver, but the simple, brutal weight of a single ear of maize. Every creak of the door, every shuffling footstep in the darkness is a question of who will be the next to vanish, the next to be carried to the shallow, frozen ground where the graves are so close together they seem to huddle for warmth. The promises of England, of a paradise of plenty, feel like a cruel myth whispered across the vast, indifferent ocean. The woman's mind, starved and weary, drifts to the stories she was told before the crossing, a land teeming with game, rivers running with gold. But here, the only plenty is the unceasing pain. The only sound is the silent, gnawing ache of the void inside them, a hunger that eats not just at the body, but at the soul. She thinks of the words of the men, of their grand ambitions, of the life she left behind for a dream of something more. And now, this is all that is left. This mud, this sickness, this unending cold, this silence that screams. The little wooden doll slips from her hand. It falls without a sound, a quiet final release, and rolls into the frozen mud at her feet. Its smooth, vacant face stares upward, its painted eyes a perfect, unfeeling witness to the ruin all around it. It is a symbol of a lost innocence, a reminder of the child she buried and of the innocence of a colony that had been lost long before the first grave was dug. She looks at the mud, at the way the doll is being swallowed by it, and knows that the doll has found its true home. The mud, the earth, the cold, they are the only things that will remain. And in the face of the unfeeling doll, she sees a chilling reflection of her own fate, a quiet understanding of the price they would all eventually pay, not just with their lives, but with the very essence of their humanity. The taste of salt is everywhere. It is on their cracked lips from the brackish river water, in the air from the distant bay, and in the bitter, thin sweat that coats their skin in the deep chill of winter. A man, once a cooper from London, runs his tongue over his dry mouth, his gaze fixed on a small, rusted bucket. It is a simple object, a tool for carrying water, but in his mind it holds the ghosts of another life, of full barrels of ale and wine, of casks of salted meats and plump fish. The memory of that sweet, yeasty aroma is a form of exquisite torture. His hands, once strong and nimble enough to shape oak staves and hammer iron bands, now tremble uncontrollably. He can no longer hold the tools of his trade. All around him, the remnants of their former lives lie abandoned and useless. The adze, the saw, the chisels. each one a silent, corroding symbol of a purpose forgotten. The colony was built on a foundation of blind ambition, a grand venture of kings and merchants. But the ambition was a poisoned seed sown in a hostile land. They had come to this swampy ground with soft hands and hardened hearts, their eyes fixed on the false gleam of gold, not on the soil that could feed them. They had built a church before they built a storehouse, and prayed for a salvation that never came. The land itself seemed to mock them, with its endless, indifferent forests and its cruel, barren river. The trees held no game, the soil no food, and the river, which they thought would carry their fortunes, now served as a murky, cold grave for their dreams. Their pride was the first thing they lost, and the second was their humanity. The siege, a slow and methodical strangulation by the native people they had failed to understand, had turned their world into a prison. The woods, once a source of wonder and promise, were now a wall of hostile shadows. They were trapped, forced to watch as their bodies consumed themselves, as their flesh wasted away and their bones grew sharp beneath their skin. The silence of the night was punctuated by sounds that had become commonplace. The hacking cough of the sick, the quiet whimpering of a child, the soft shuffling footsteps of a man who no longer had the strength to walk with purpose. And in the darkest, most desperate hours, new sounds began. The hushed scrape of a shovel in the shadows, not to bury, but to unearth. The air, already thick with the scent of pine and river mud, began to carry a new, unspeakable aroma that no one dared to name. The men who had once spoken of faith and virtue now spoke of things they would do to survive, things that gnawed at the last vestiges of their souls. The whispers began in the dark corners of the fort, quiet words about the horses and the dogs, and then, in the deepest, most desperate quiet, about what lay buried in the shallow graves. The moral compass of their civilization had splintered, its iron filings scattering into the frozen mud. The laws they had brought from England were just words on a page, and the justice they once preached was a ghost in the wind. The gallows, a crude wooden structure at the edge of the fort, once meant for petty thieves and mutineers, now seemed to wait for a greater, more primal crime. It stood as a silent witness to the complete, irrevocable collapse of their society. The Cooper looked at his hands, once strong enough to bend iron, now trembling and weak. He feels an invisible rope tighten around his own neck, the noose of his own starving body. He understands now that the true prison was not the fort's palisade, but the choices they had made, the greed that had blinded them, the pride that had prevented them from listening. Their slow, agonizing starvation was not just a physical suffering, it was a spiritual and moral one. And in that hollow, unforgiving place, where the only plenty was the unceasing pain, they were learning a new kind of language, whispered in the cold, a language of things unmade. It was a language that would soon turn the living into the unliving, the human into something less. And in the end, it would be the silence that told their final, terrible story. A single tattered blanket, woven with what was once a vibrant blue thread, is all that separates an old man from the unforgiving dampness of the earth. His name, John, is a whisper on the wind, a memory from a world that seems to have ceased to exist. He is a ghost among ghosts, his body thinned by hunger, his skin stretched taut over the sharp angles of his bones. He lies motionless, his gaze fixed on a small, cold circle of silver. It is a locket he keeps tucked into his shirt, and with a shaking finger, he now pulls it free. Inside is the painted miniature of his wife, her cheeks full and rosy, her smile a beacon of impossible warmth. He traces the tiny, delicate brushstrokes, a sacrament to a life of abundance and love. The cold metal against his palm is a chilling reminder, an anchor to a past that feels like a beautiful, terrible dream. He remembers the journey, the rolling sickness of the sea, the boundless promise of a new shore. They had been told of a place of plenty, a wild land to be tamed, a new frontier where fortunes were waiting to be seized. The fever of gold had possessed them all, a collective madness that blinded them to the reality around them. They saw the shimmer of treasure in every rock and imagined jewels at the bottom of every stream, but they were blind to the vast, verdant prison that surrounded them. The land they arrived in was a verdant Eden, but its bounty was hidden from them by their own pride and the cold hostility of a people they failed to understand. The tools they brought were for excavation, not cultivation, and so the land, in its quiet power, refused to give up its secrets. Now, that fever is a cold, agonizing ache. It lives not just in their stomachs, but in the hollow marrow of their bones. The constant, gnawing hunger has become the sole master of their lives, dictating every thought and movement. It is a presence more powerful than any king or god. They are trapped inside the palisade, their world a small, muddy circle, while the vast, indifferent wilderness outside watches and waits. The silence of the night is not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping village. It is a tense, suffocating stillness, punctuated only by the sound of a shallow shovel digging in the shadows, not to bury, but to unearth. The air, already thick with the scent of pine and river mud, now carries a new unspeakable aroma, a sweet, cloying smell that no one dares to name. It is the scent of a line that has been crossed, of a truth that can no longer be ignored. The dreams he has are no longer of home or family, but of food. Dreams of plump chickens, of warm bread, of thick, hearty stews. He wakes from them with a desperate gasp. The phantom tastes a torture more real than the frozen ground beneath him. All around him, the men who had once been brothers in arms are now strangers, their eyes hollow with a quiet, feral madness. The civility they brought with them from England, the laws and customs that defined them, has dissolved in the acid of their starvation. It is a slow, agonizing process of unmaking. They are no longer Englishmen, but something more primal, more ancient, stripped of everything but the most basic, terrible will to survive. The locket he holds is the last piece of that vanished world. He clutches it tighter, the cold silver biting into his palm. He stares at the miniature, at the rosy, vibrant cheeks of his wife. Her face, so full of warmth and life, is a quiet reproach. It is a veil lifted to reveal the true cost of their vanity. They did not just lose their food and their health, they lost their souls. They had come to a new world believing they were its masters, but they were always its prisoners. The gold they had starved for was never in the ground, but in the life they had thrown away, the life that stared back at him from within the silver circle. And as the cold morning light begins to break, he knows that the hunger has turned from a curse into a judgment, and the greatest horror of all is no longer what they might die of, but what they might live to become. The sun, a pale, anemic disk in the depths of a bitter winter, casts long, sickly shadows across the muddy ground of the fort. There is no warmth in its light, only a cold, gray wash that reveals the full extent of the colony's decay. A young girl, maybe 14, sits hunched against a wall of rough-hewn logs, her ragged cloak pulled tight around her thin frame. She runs her hand over a small, chipped bowl in her lap, feeling the familiar, smooth grain of the wood. The bowl is a link to her old life, a simple object from the kitchen of her family's modest home in England, a vessel that once held porridge or thick bread pudding. Now, it is an empty symbol of a hunger so profound it feels like a physical presence, a living creature clawing at her from the inside. The air is so still, the silence so complete, that the soft rasp of her own breathing feels like a violation of the tomb-like quiet. She had come on the last ship, her heart filled with a girl's simple dreams of a grand adventure. She was a servant, not a gentleman's wife, but the promise of a new world was enough. She had imagined new horizons, a life filled with honest work and the simple joys of a new community. The journey had been a trial, the hurricane a terrifying dance of wind and water that had tossed their tiny vessel like a toy. But she had survived that storm. The sight of land, a verdant green line on the horizon, had been a deliverance, a final, unshakable proof that a new beginning was possible. But this new land offers no deliverance. It offers only a slow, relentless tide of despair. The hunger began as a whisper and has grown into a roar, a constant, gnawing pain that has washed away the color and light from her world. She sees the men of the colony as they truly are now, stripped of their grand swagger and their boasts of gold and glory. They are not grand adventurers, but hollow men with hollow eyes. The light of ambition that once burned in them has been extinguished, leaving only the cold ash of desperation. Their gaunt faces and their shuffling gait are a testament to a world that is quietly, inexorably unraveling. The laws of man, the civility they brought with them across the ocean, have become as useless as a rotted sail. The things they once valued, their iron nails, their pewter cups, their fine wool cloaks, are now just objects without purpose in a world where the only true value is a single kernel of corn. The sounds of the fort, the hacking cough of the sick, the low, mournful murmur of prayers, the quiet desperation that lives in every footstep, are the soundtrack to a world unmaking itself. The boy she used to help with chores has become a ghost, his form growing thinner each day until he simply ceased to exist. The woman who once hummed a tune as she worked now only stares out at the river with eyes that have seen too much. Jane feels herself fading, too. The simple dreams she once carried, now nothing but wisps of smoke in the chill air. The hunger is not just a physical thing. It is a slow, methodical erasure of memory, of hope, of self. It leaves behind only a raw, empty space where a person used to be. She looks down at the chipped bowl in her lap, its curve now a familiar, painful weight. And in its perfect empty space, she sees a chilling reflection of her own fate. The empty space is not just for food, it is for her own fleeting life. The bowl is a mirror, and in its void, she sees the quiet, inevitable conclusion of their grand experiment. The innocence she brought with her has been consumed by the same brutal, patient hunger that is eating away at the colony itself. And as the sickly sunlight fades, leaving the fort in an even deeper gray, she knows that the final, most terrifying chapter of their story has already begun, not with a bang or a shout, but with the silent, terrible stillness of an empty bowl. The great stone church, a testament to God's presence in this new world, stands as a cold, hollow shell against the winter sky. Its steeple, a skeletal finger pointing to a gray, indifferent heaven, holds a bell thick with verdigris, hanging motionless and mute. A man, a former blacksmith whose hands once shaped hot iron, now clings to the cold, rusted gate of the churchyard. The metal is a cruel mirror of his own state, brittle, cold, and marked by a slow, creeping decay. The air smells of damp earth and the sharp, sour tang of desperation, a scent that has replaced the sweet incense of a living faith. He remembers the hymns, the strong voices raised in praise, the words of promise and salvation. Now, the only faith is in the grim certainty of tomorrow's hunger. The gate is not just a barrier to the consecrated ground, it is a prison, and the church's walls are a silent, mocking testament to a God who seems to have turned away. The colony was built on a foundation of blind ambition, a faith in human power and greed that eclipsed all else. They were men of trade, of privilege, of little patience for the slow, quiet work of the land. They had come for gold and for glory, and in their hubris, they had built a fortress against a world they did not understand. They chose the prospector's pan over the farmer's shovel, the glint of a false promise over the simple, back-breaking work of survival. They believed this land would yield its riches without a fight, that its bounty would flow to them freely. But the river, which they thought would carry their fortunes, now serves only as a grave. The forest, which they thought would provide a limitless harvest, is now a hostile wilderness. The native people, who might have taught them to survive, are now enemies, their bows and arrows a constant threat from the surrounding wilderness. The blacksmith's hammer lies in the forge, a ghost of its former power, cold and still. All around the fort, the tools of survival, the fishing net, the axe, the shovel, were cast aside for the prospector's pan, and now all of them lie unused, rusted and forgotten. The fever of gold was not a curse sent from heaven, but a choice they made themselves. And now, in the deepest winter of their discontent, they are paying the price. The hunger has become more than a physical torment. It has become a profound spiritual emptiness, a void where hope and faith once resided. He looks at his own hands, once strong enough to bend iron, now trembling and weak. The calluses from a lifetime of honest labor are still there, but they are faded, and the skin beneath is thin and sallow. The tools he once used to create now feel like artifacts from another life, a life of purpose he no longer inhabits. He is not just starving for gold and not just starving for food. He is starving for a reason to be, for a purpose he lost when he traded his hammer for a dream of unearned wealth. The church stands as the ultimate symbol of their folly. It was to be the heart of a new Christian city, but its cold stone walls now enclose a moral wasteland. The bell above him, silent and still, is a symbol of a God who has not spoken, who has turned away and left them to their own devices, to their own terrible final judgment. There will be no salvation for them, not here, not now. Their final reckoning will be with the cold earth, with the silence of the unfeeling bell, and with the terrible realization that their fall was of their own making. And as the blacksmith releases his grip on the rusted gate, his hands leaving a faint ochre smear, he knows that the final act of this tragedy will not be a great battle or a climactic rescue, but a quiet, unseen collapse from within, a moral ruin more terrifying than any death they could have faced. A single candle flickers, its small, trembling flame casting a golden pool of light on the rough wooden table. The light dances, illuminating the fine dust that floats in the air, a dust that seems to be all that remains of a world that is dying. A man, his face a mask of exhaustion and profound shame, watches the light. The faint smell of tallow and smoke is a meager comfort against the overwhelming stench of sickness and unwashed bodies that fills the small, windowless cabin. He holds a small silver coin in his palm, a shilling from London, the image of a long-dead king staring blankly up at him. It is a useless thing now, a piece of metal without value, a cruel joke from a past that feels like a forgotten myth. Its cold weight is a physical reminder of the false promises that brought them here. He was a merchant, a man who understood markets and trade, not the silent, ruthless logic of survival. He had envisioned a city of commerce, a new port where goods from the New World would flow freely, making him a king. He had traded in silks and spices, in fine lumber and precious gems, and had brought with him an entire ledger of grand ideas and ledgers. But the only goods are rats and snakes, and the only kingdom is ruled by hunger. His ledgers, so meticulously kept, are now worthless pages, their ink faded and their promises as empty as the air in his lungs. The life they had imagined, a life of profit and prosperity, was built on a lie. They had come to the wrong place with the wrong mindset, and their greed had sealed their fate long before the hunger set in. The siege by the Powhatan has been a slow, methodical strangulation, a tightening of the noose that prevents them from hunting or foraging. The walls of the fort are no longer a defense, but a cage, and every man, woman, and child inside is a prisoner, awaiting a final, terrible judgment. The men who came with him, once full of swagger and bravado, have become skeletons wrapped in rags, their eyes haunted by a knowledge that has nothing to do with God or law. The laws of England, of civilized man, have dissolved. The civility they once held so dear has been gnawed away by the hunger until only a thin, brittle shell remains. In the shadows of the cabins and the dark corners of the fort, men who were once neighbors now watch one another with a suspicion that verges on a feral, animalistic hatred. The whispers he hears in the dark are no longer of commerce or profit, but of a desperate, final solution. Words are spoken so quietly, they are almost carried away by the cold wind. Words about the shallow graves and what can be found in them, about the terrible, final price of their survival. This is the last and most terrifying chapter of their starvation. It is not just a physical hunger, but a spiritual and moral one. It has devoured their flesh, their hope, and finally, the last vestiges of their humanity. The shilling he holds, a perfect gleaming circle, is a painful echo of the life they lost. He remembers a time when it would buy a hearty meal, a warm pint of ale, a bit of comfort. Now, it would buy nothing. It is as useless as the grand ideas that had brought them to this place. The shilling, a symbol of all their vanity and greed, slips from his hand. It falls with a faint metallic clink and rolls across the floor, a tiny, forgotten circle of their failure. The candle sputters, its last breath of light a final act of grace, and then for a moment, the cabin is plunged into the deepest, most absolute darkness. It is a darkness that holds the final unspoken truth of the price they would all eventually pay, a truth not of survival, but of damnation. In that void, where all light and hope has died, they are no longer men, no longer Englishmen. They are something else, something that has been made by hunger and has become as cold and cruel as the winter that claims them. Their final story will not be written in history books, but in the silence of the mud, in the forgotten whispers of what they were forced to become.